My name's Brandon and this is Nickelodeon Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Nickelodeon shows and retrospectively review them. This week's review is Ren and Stimpy Time Warp.
Oh shit, here we go again.
For the 7th and final time on Nickelodeon Video Game History, we're reviewing a Ren and Stimpy game. Getting through this has been torture, but after today we can finally start looking at some different franchises. Released in November of 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Time Warp would be the final standalone Ren and Stimpy game, but they would go on to be featured in multiple crossover titles. Most recently, they were featured in Nick Kart Racers 2. And of course, we've got new developers here. Sculptured Software was the last studio to get a crack at Ren and Stimpy. Founded in 1984, they were acquired by Acclaim in 1995 before eventually going out of business in 2002. Looking through their history, Sculptured Software has actually left a pretty big mark on the industry. The original founders of Avalanche Studio, the makers of the TAC games and the upcoming Hogwarts Legacy, all came from Sculptured Software. As for Sculptured Software itself, they developed over 100 games in their lifespan. They worked on a port of Mario Bros for Atari and also created games for Star Wars, WWE, The Simpsons and Batman. Researching Time Warp is a pretty tough thing to do. It actually has its own Wikipedia page as well as a couple of pages on other wikis, which is more than we usually get. However, the information on these pages is incredibly bare bones. From what I could dig up, Time Warp is actually the second highest rated Ren and Stimpy game, just behind Stimpy's invention of course. Obviously, the competition isn't exactly the strongest, but Time Warp received considerably higher review scores than those other games. Perhaps Ren and Stimpy will go out on a high note? Heck, I'd settle for them going out on an average note at this point. Time Warp appears to be one of the rare Ren and Stimpy games that isn't based on a specific episode or has each of its levels inspired by individual episodes. Here we see Ren and Stimpy set out on a quest to win a time machine by collecting a bunch of Gritty Kitty. Just hearing that premise, you're probably bracing yourself for yet another 2D platformer. Surprisingly, Time Warp is basically a beat 'em up. Sure, it still features a lot of platforming, but the moment-to-moment gameplay generally sees you beating up various enemies. It only took until the very last game for a developer to try something truly different with this series. Playing Time Warp really feels like an amalgamation of all the other Ren and Stimpy games. Every single enemy you encounter here has been seen in previous games. You've got the big vicious dog, firefighters, mosquitoes. Basically everything you encounter in this game has been seen in another title. When you drop into the game, there's actually a choice for a second player to join you, which is kinda cool for this series. As far as I'm aware, you don't get to choose between Ren and Stimpy. When I started the game, I was just forced into using Ren. I didn't check out the 2-player mode, but it would be interesting to see whether they play as Stimpy or a second Ren. I ask this because Stimpy actually shows up during levels. If anybody knows the answer, feel free to comment down below. Your moveset here is pretty basic. You can jump, grab things, attack, and duck. Combat doesn't have any nuance here. Not that I was expecting it. You'll just be mashing the attack button as Ren uses his tried and tested slap attack. Attacking feels so imprecise. Even after spending a considerable amount of time with the game, I still never felt confident that my attack was going to land. I don't know that this issue is entirely on the devs though. Almost every game I've played where 2D characters are brawling in an environment where they can move in 3 dimensions has some sort of issue like this. It's so hard to properly line up an attack. It's bad enough to hit something static, like these wood planks, but when you throw in enemies that are flying around, it becomes a nightmare. There are a number of items you can pick up and use too. There's an item allowing you to walk up walls, giving you access to otherwise inaccessible areas, as well as items that give you stronger attacks such as the beaver or bow and arrow. Frustratingly, the movement controls are also an issue. Getting Ren to run around with the D-pad just felt cumbersome. It never felt like he moved with any fluidity, which actually added to the combat issues while also making some of the very basic platforming a chore. Something I only discovered by accident was that the shoulder buttons allow Ren to run. Initially, I thought I'd just discovered the secret formula to making the movement better, but actually, it makes it worse. Sure, the running speed is quick, but it is insanely slippery. Sculptured software has made it feel like this entire game takes place on an iceberg. The worst part is that if you happen to hit a wall while running, you take damage. Seriously. What a god-awful design decision. Speaking of health and taking damage, there are some pretty big issues here. Firstly, why is the health bar so abstract? I wouldn't blame you for looking at the screen and not even knowing that there is a health bar. Your health is represented by the purple bricks on the left side of the gritty kitty counter down the bottom. The way health chips off this feels so random, and it never gives you a solid indicator of how much health is left. They managed to make one of the simplest aspects of video games needlessly complicated. Even worse is that damn near everything in this game is a hazard. Like I said, just running into a wall will chip off damage, but I swear to God it feels like every inch of the ground in this game is covered in something that will slowly kill you. The hazards are always so random too. The most baffling one is the iconic invention from Stimpy's invention. If you step on this helmet, Ren is rendered useless. While you're wearing this, all you can do is walk. That's it. There is a hammer item found throughout levels that will smash the helmet off, but if you don't have that item and there isn't one laying around, you're shit out of luck and basically just have to kill yourself. Thankfully, the game is pretty generous about checkpointing and giving you chances to continue. You have a few lives to use while playing, and when you use all of them, you're taken to a continue screen that has 3 credits. Doesn't make up for all of the annoying health stuff, but it makes the game slightly less tedious. So what actually is the objective of this game? Well, as mentioned in the beginning, Ren and Stimpy need to collect Gritty Kitty to win a time machine. This means you'll be trying to grab Gritty Kitty coupons as you go through levels, trying not to die. This is only a very small aspect of the game though. Once you collect the desired amount of Gritty Kitty, you get the time machine and the gameplay becomes kinda different. Unfortunately, I never got to experience that. You see, the game is extremely vague about telling you exactly how much Gritty Kitty you need to collect. In the opening cutscene, it says they needed to collect 47 million coupons. Obviously, there aren't 47 million items to collect here. Because there's no proper explanation, it all results in you going through the opening couple of levels, grabbing Gritty Kitty, and hoping you have the correct amount. Once you get to the end of the second level, if you haven't collected enough Gritty Kitty, you get a game over screen. This is fucking insane because the game never really explains any of this to you. After a couple of failed attempts, I decided to watch a long play to see what I had to do. I was initially thinking that I might have to collect every Gritty Kitty coupon to progress. This was immediately debunked, as the long play I watched had the player missing some of them. Watching this left me none the wiser. How many of these goddamn bags did I need to collect to progress? After far too many attempts, the best I could manage was 60 coupons, which still wasn't good enough. The long play I watched got 80, so apparently it was some number between 60 and 80 to progress. Unfortunately, I just couldn't collect the desired amount no matter how much I played. For those of you who haven't played Time Warp, you might be thinking it's just because I suck. But if you go look at the comments on any video showcasing a playthrough of Time Warp, you'll see countless comments of people saying they never got past the opening section. Maybe Time Warp really gets good after these couple of stages, reviewers certainly seem to like it, but I'll never know. How hard is it to just explain your game to the player? Why wouldn't you give a set goal to let me know how close I was? Heck, I would have settled for them being genuinely clear about having to collect the Gritty Kitty coupons. The 47 million comment in the opening makes it seem like a joke. From a technical and mechanical standpoint, Time Warp isn't great, but it's certainly better than a number of other Ren and Stimpy games. However, this might be my least favourite in the series purely because it does such an awful job in giving the player directions. This review is probably going to be one of the shortest I've done since the very early days of Cartoon Network video game history. I just really couldn't progress past this initial collectathon area. There wasn't even a password system I could utilise to skip ahead. There is a password system of some sort that seemingly allows you to play mini-games or something. I'm not really sure, because like almost everything else in this game, it's vague and unnecessarily complicated. I appreciate that Sculpted Software actually thought outside of the box for this game and attempted something other than a standard 2D platformer. While the kind of platforming has been a little varied, most of the Ren and Stimpy games have been the same thing at the end of the day. It's refreshing to see this beat 'em up gameplay attempted, but it's a massive failure in my book. I really don't like when games force you to collect a certain amount of collectibles just to progress. It's one of the main reasons why I don't love games like Banjo-Kazooie, which force the player to collect damn near everything to properly beat the game. However, this wouldn't have been an automatic negative against Time Warp if they had just let the player know how many coupons they needed. Just provide me with one iota of information to give me some direction. Instead, I'm left to just fumble around in the dark, hoping this time I collected enough of the damn things. Even ignoring that, the combat is too finicky and the movement is god-awful. Time Warp is a bad game, and while it was a chore to play, it's also a fitting way to close this chapter of Nickelodeon's video game history. We're 10 games into Nickelodeon video game history so far, and I've played one game I would consider good, Stimpy's Invention. Surprisingly, Nickelodeon has had a worse start than Cartoon Network. At least in Cartoon Network's first 10 games, they had stuff like Robot Rampage, Manduck's Lab, and Relish Rampage, which were enjoyable. Thankfully, we'll be moving on to a new era of Nick games now. Next week, I'll be checking out the Real Monsters game, which is the final ever Nickelodeon game on the Super Nintendo. After that, we start entering the PS1 and Nintendo 64 era of games. With much more variety in franchises and genres, things are about to get a lot more interesting in Nickelodeon's video game history. To make sure you don't miss all of those exciting reviews, make sure you're subscribed.